The cheap plastic of the key card felt slick against Kaylee Byers' damp palm. Her thumb nervously traced its edges as she stared at her phone screen. A single text message glowed with brutal finality. Mount Sinai Accounts Department. Payment for Catherine Byers is overdue. Account balance. $50,000. Please remit immediately. The red exclamation point next to it felt like a tiny, sharp jab directly into her chest. Her breath hitched. The air in the plush, silent hallway of the St. Regis seemed to thin, becoming impossible to draw into her lungs. She squeezed her eyes shut, the image of her mother's pale, sleeping face flashing behind her eyelids. The sterile scent of the hospital, the quiet beep of the machines, keeping her alive. Okay, Kaylee, she whispered, her voice a raw, trembling thread of sound. You can do this. It was for her. It was all for her. Taking a shaky breath, she forced her legs to move. Each step toward the sweet-marked penthouse felt heavy, as if she were wading through thick mud. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. This wasn't a hotel corridor. It was a walk to the gallows. She reached the door. Her hand trembled as she raised the key card to the electronic lock. A soft green light blinked, followed by an almost silent click. The sound was a death knell. She pushed the heavy door open and stepped inside. The suite was pitch black. The only light was the faint, glittering tapestry of the Manhattan skyline, cast through a massive floor-to-ceiling window. The air was thick, almost suffocating. It smelled of expensive whiskey and a sharp, masculine cologne that clung to the back of her throat, making her feel dizzy. She hesitated at the threshold, her fingers tight around the strap of her worn canvas bag. Hello, she called out, her voice barely audible, swallowed by the oppressive silence. A deep voice, laced with impatience and the rough edge of alcohol, answered from the direction of the bedroom. You're late. Kaylee's stomach clenched. The client. He was waiting. I'm so sorry, Before she could finish her apology, a tall, broad silhouette emerged from the shadows. He moved with a predator's speed, closing the distance between them in 2 long strides. He gave her no time to explain, no time to even breathe. His hand shot out, fingers wrapping around her wrist like a steel manacle. He yanked her into the room. The force of the pull sent her stumbling forward. She collided with a chest as hard as stone, the impact knocking the air from her lungs. She could feel the steady, powerful beat of his heart against her cheek. A low, contemptuous chuckle rumbled in his chest. He must have mistaken her genuine shock for some kind of professional, coy performance. Before she could protest, he shoved her back against the wall. The cool surface was a shock against her heated skin. His towering frame completely eclipsed the city lights, trapping her in a shadow. The sheer size of him, the raw power radiating from him, was overwhelming. I'm not. You don't understand. She tried to stammer, her mind racing to find the words to explain the mistake. But her words were smothered. His mouth came down on hers, a brutal, punishing kiss that tasted of whiskey and dominance. It wasn't a kiss of passion. It was an act of ownership, a statement of control. It was invasive and absolute, leaving no room for argument or resistance. Her brain went white with static. All thought, all protest, dissolved into a singular, paralyzing fear. Then, an image broke through the fog. Her mother's face, fragile and wan against a stark white hospital pillow. A single tear escaped the corner of her eye, tracing a hot path down her temple. Despair, cold and absolute, washed over her. She closed her eyes. Her body, which had been tense with struggle, went limp. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a hollow, chilling resignation. He felt the change in her, the sudden, rigid surrender. He broke the kiss, his breathing harsh in the silence. Without a word, he hooked an arm under her knees and lifted her as if she weighed nothing. He carried her toward the bedroom. Through it all, Kaylee was a doll with its strings cut, a soulless puppet, her mind a maelstrom of shame, humiliation, and a soul-crushing guilt that ate away at her from the inside out. Dawn was a smear of bruised purple and gray against the window when Kaylee jerked awake. Her body ached with a deep, unfamiliar soreness. The sheets were a tangled mess around her, smelling of him, of a stranger. She turned her head slowly on the pillow. In the faint morning light, she saw his face clearly for the first time. He was on his side, sleeping, his features relaxed, a strong jaw, a straight nose, dark hair falling across his forehead. He was handsome in a way that was almost violent, breathtakingly so. And completely, utterly unknown. A wave of nausea churned in her stomach, hot and acidic. She scrambled out of the bed, one hand clamped over her mouth, and stumbled into the adjoining bathroom. She reached over the toilet, but only bile came up. Her body shook with violent, empty heaves. When it was over, she leaned her forehead against the cool marble wall, gasping for breath. She caught her reflection in the vast, gold-trimmed mirror. A pale, haunted-looking woman stared back, her eyes wide with shock, her lips bruised. She bit down hard on her lower lip, the sharp pain a welcome distraction. Calm down. Just get out of here. Moving with the stealth of a cat, she crept back into the bedroom. She found her clothes discarded on a chair and dressed with frantic, silent haste. Every rustle of fabric sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. Her cheap canvas bag lay on the floor, its contents spilled out. Her wallet, her keys, a tube of lip balm, and her old, crack-screen phone. She knelt, her fingers closing around the familiar, worn plastic. She just wanted to grab it and run. Run and never look back. As her fingers brushed against the phone, a hand shot out from the bed and clamped down on her wrist. She gasped, her head snapping up. He was awake. He had pushed himself up on one elbow, his eyes open and fixed on her. They were a cold, piercing shade of gray, sharp as a hawk's, and utterly devoid of the drunken haze from the night before. At that exact moment, her phone vibrated in her hand. The screen lit up. The caller ID read, Mom's nurse. Archer's gaze flickered from her face to the glowing screen. A look of profound disgust twisted his handsome features. He thought it was her pimp or another client calling to line up the next job. My rule, he said, his voice a low, cold growl. The transaction is over. No follow-up. That's my mom's nurse, Kaylee cried, desperation making her voice sharp. She tried to wrench her hand free to answer the call. He didn't believe her. He saw it as just another pathetic, predictable trick to get more money, to forge a connection. His fingers tightened on her wrist, a cruel, deliberate pressure. With his other hand, he snatched the phone from her grasp. No, she screamed. He ignored her. His expression was a mask of cold fury, an anger that seemed disproportionate, almost personal. He rose from the bed, his naked body a terrifying display of power and muscle. And with a sudden, violent motion, he hurled her phone against the far wall. It hit the plaster with a sickening crack. The device exploded into pieces, plastic, glass, and metal scattering across the expensive carpet. The screen went black forever. Kaylee stared at the wreckage, her only line to the hospital, her only way to know if her mother was... Everything went silent. The blood in her veins turned to ice. The terror and despair that had held her captive all night suddenly combusted, transforming into a white-hot, blinding rage. She ripped her wrist from his grasp with a strength she didn't know she possessed. She didn't look at him. She didn't say a word. She just turned and ran, fleeing the room, the suite, the man who had taken everything and then smashed the last, fragile piece of her world into dust. Kaylee stumbled out into the hallway, her back hitting the cold wall opposite the door to Penthouse B as she slid down to the floor, her legs unable to support her. She gasped for air, each breath a ragged, painful sob that tore at her throat. The nightmare inside the room was over, but the reality was just beginning. Just then, the door to the adjacent suite, Penthouse C, creaked open. A greasy, middle-aged man with a comb-over peered out, his face a mask of impatience. Are you the one Tina Whitescent? You're an hour late. Kaylee froze. Her brain, already reeling, struggled to process his words. Tina Whitescent, Penthouse C. A wave of dizziness washed over her, so profound she thought she would pass out. The world tilted on its axis. She had gone to the wrong room. The door to be had been unlatched, a cruel trick of fate. She had pushed it open without a second thought, never checking the smeared C on the card in her hand. The sheer, crushing absurdity of it hit her like a physical blow. The sacrifice, the humiliation, the terror, it had all been for nothing. A mistake. A stupid, catastrophic mistake. Laughter, hysterical and broken, bubbled up in her throat. She choked it back, the sound turning into a strangled gasp. She didn't answer the man. She didn't even look at him again. Using the wall for support, she pushed herself to her feet and staggered toward the elevators, her movements clumsy and uncoordinated. One word echoed in her mind. Money. She had done it for the money, and she would be damned if she left with nothing. The subway ride back to her tiny, run-down apartment in Queens was a blur. When she finally stumbled through her own front door, she saw a plain white envelope on her small kitchen table. Tina's name was scrawled on the front. Tina, who still held a spare key from their days as roommates, must have dropped it off. Her fingers trembled as she tore it open. Inside was a thick stack of $100 bills, the advance payment. Kaylee stared at the cash, a toxic mix of revulsion and bitter irony churning in her gut. This money was meant to save her. Instead, it felt like blood money from a crime she hadn't even been paid for. She made a decision. Her hands, now steady with a cold, hard resolve, found a piece of hotel stationery she'd shoved in her bag days ago. She grabbed a pen. Her handwriting was shaky, but the words were sharp and clear. Payment received for services rendered. She folded the note, slipped it into a fresh envelope along with the key card to Penthouse B, and walked to the 24-hour convenience store on the corner. She paid a small fortune for an overnight courier service, sending the envelope back to the St. Regis, back to him. It was a pathetic, petty act of defiance, but it was all she had. She stared at the cash. She would not let her mother die because of her pride. She stuffed the bills into her drawer and sent back only the cold plastic of the key card and her bitter words. The money she kept, IT would go toward her mother's treatment, every last cent of it, even if the thought of touching it made her skin crawl. She would use it, and she would hate herself for using it, but she would not let her mother die because of her pride. Back in her apartment, the adrenaline finally faded, leaving her utterly depleted. She collapsed onto her lumpy sofa, pulled her knees to her chest, and finally allowed the tears to come. They were silent, scalding tears of grief, shame, and a rage so deep it felt like it would burn her from the inside out. Back in Penthouse B, Archer woke to a splitting headache and the sour taste of old whiskey. He sat up, rubbing his temples. The suite was empty. The woman was gone. He reached for the heavy gold watch and the stack of hundreds he'd left on the dresser. Empty. The air, however, held a faint, lingering scent that was different from the cloying perfumes of the women he usually entertained. It was subtle, something clean and fresh, like soap and rain. He swung his legs out of bed, and his eyes landed on the corner of the room. He saw the shattered remains of the phone he destroyed. A flicker of annoyance, or something like it, passed through him. He walked over, his bare feet sinking into the plush carpet. He nudged a piece of the broken phone case with his toe. Something small and white was caught underneath it. Curious, he bent down and picked it up. It was a photograph, small and slightly worn, the kind you tuck into a phone case. It was a picture of a young woman, maybe 19 or 20, holding a large artist's sketchbook. She was smiling at the camera, a genuine, unreserved smile that lit up her whole face. Her eyes, a warm amber color, seemed to capture the sunlight itself. He stared at the photo. The girl in the picture was vibrant and full of life. It was her, the woman from last night, but at the same time, it was a complete stranger. So different from the terrified, then rigidly compliant woman in the dark. Just then, the doorbell chimed. Annoyed by the interruption, he pulled on a pair of sweatpants and strode to the door. A hotel bellman stood there, holding a courier envelope. For you, Mr. Leon. Archer took the envelope, his brow furrowed. He tore it open. Inside was only his key card and a folded piece of hotel stationery. He unfolded it. Payment received for services rendered. His handsome face, already clouded by his hangover, darkened into a thunderous mask. She had taken his money he hadn't even offered, he growled. The casual, dismissive contempt in those 5 words was unmistakable. She had sent the key card back with a mocking note, a deliberate, infuriating jab at him, as if to say he was just another transaction she could close and forget. A surge of raw, possessive anger, an emotion he hadn't felt in years, coursed through him. It wasn't just anger, it was the fury of a predator whose prey had not only escaped but had turned back to bite. His gaze fell to the small photograph still clutched in his other hand. He looked from the mocking, crumpled note to the smiling face in the picture. He pulled out his own phone and dialed his personal assistant. Find her, he commanded, his voice lethally quiet. 6 years later. The arrivals hall at JFK Airport was a chaotic symphony of rolling suitcases, overlapping announcements, and 100 different languages. A woman with a determined set to her jaw pushed a luggage cart through the throng. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the youthful softness in her face had been replaced by the sharp, capable lines of a woman who had fought for everything she had. Perched atop the luggage were 2 small children, a boy and a girl, their heads swiveling to take in the overwhelming sights and sounds. The advance payment had cleared the immediate hospital arrears, but it hadn't been enough to save her mother in the end. 6 years of grief and grinding work had hardened Kaylee's resolve. This was Kaylee Byers. The boy, Leo, watched the chaos with a calm, analytical gaze that was unnervingly adult. The girl, Lily, pointed at everything, her bright eyes wide with a boundless curiosity. Kaylee stopped near the exit, taking a deep, steadying breath of the familiar, humid New York air. We're back, she murmured, more to herself than to the children. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, a small, genuine smile touching her lips for the first time since she'd landed. Kaylee, where are you guys? I'm pulling up to the curb. The voice on the other end was a burst of pure energy. We just got through customs, Jesse. We'll be right there, Kaylee said, the warmth of her friend's voice chasing away some of the lingering anxiety. Leo hopped off the cart with the agility of a tiny gymnast. I'll help, Mom, he said, his small hands already working to straighten a bag that had shifted. Mommy, I want ice cream, Lily announced, pointing a chubby finger at a Baskin-Robbins stand across the hall. Kaylee laughed, a soft, tired sound, and stroked her daughter's hair. How about we see Aunt Jessie first, sweetie? She looked at her children, her twins, and a fierce, protective love swelled in her chest, a force strong enough to move mountains. They were her reason for them. She had to make this work. She had to build a new life for them in this city of ghosts and broken promises. She had no idea that a fateful encounter was only minutes away. And she certainly had no idea that across the city, in a sleek, top-floor office overlooking Central Park, the man she was trying to forget still kept a 6-year-old photograph in a silver frame on his desk. Kaylee pushed the luggage cart through the automatic glass doors, and the thick, soupy heat of a New York summer enveloped them. The air smelled of exhaust fumes and hot pavement. She paused for a moment, letting the familiar chaos wash over her. 6 years ago, she'd left the city in pieces. She was returning with 2 small lives depending on her. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders, heavy but not crushing. She had carried worse. The last time she'd been in the city, she'd been racing against time to save her mother. She had failed. The money she kept had paid for a few extra weeks, but in the end, Catherine Byers had slipped away quietly in her sleep, a month after that terrible night at the St. Regis. Kaylee had buried her mother, paid the remaining bills with the last of the advance payment, and fled to California, pregnant and terrified. Now she was back. She wouldn't fail again. Not her children. Not herself. Before she could spot Jessie's car, Lily tugged at her sleeve. Mommy, I have to go potty. Now. Kaylee looked around, spotting a restroom sign down the corridor. She was juggling 2 children and a mountain of luggage, and her friend was waiting outside. Leo, can you please take your sister? I can't leave all our stuff. Leo sighed, the sound comically world-weary coming from a 5-year-old. Okay, Mom. Come on, Lily. He took his sister's hand with the practiced air of a seasoned chaperone, leading her toward the women's restroom. A few minutes later, Lily emerged, her mission accomplished, but her eyes immediately latched onto a vendor selling brightly colored mylar balloons. Specifically, a shimmering pink unicorn balloon that seemed to float majestically above the others. Forgetting her brother's stern instructions to stay close, she let go of his hand and darted toward the magical creature. Lily, wait, Leo called, already moving to intercept her. But she was fast. She rounded a corner at a full, toddler speed sprint and ran headfirst into a pair of legs. The impact sent her stumbling backward, but a man's hand caught her arm, steadying her before she fell. Lily mumbled a quick "sorry, mister," and scurried back to Leo, who grabbed her wrist and pulled her away without looking back. They returned to Kaylee, slightly flushed. "What happened?" she asked. "Nothing, Mom," Leo said quickly. "Lily just bumped into someone. She said sorry. Let's go." Kaylee, too focused on wrangling the luggage and finding Jesse's car, let it go. She didn't see the tall man who had crouched down to look at her daughter, didn't notice the strange intensity in his gray eyes. She simply gathered her children and pushed the cart forward. A cherry-red Mini Cooper screeched to a halt directly in front of them, its tires protesting loudly. The driver's side window rolled down, revealing a woman with a fiery red bob and a grin that could light up Times Square. "Miss, need a ride?" Jessie Carrillo whistled, her bright eyes sparkling with mischief. Kaylee laughed, the tension in her shoulders finally releasing. "You're still as subtle as a foghorn." She leaned in through the open window, and the two friends hugged fiercely over the car door. "I missed you so much," Jessie mumbled into her shoulder. "I missed you too," Kaylee whispered back, her eyes stinging. Jessie pulled away, her smile faltering as her gaze landed on the two small figures perched on the luggage cart. Her jaw went slack. She pointed a trembling finger at them. "Kaylee, are those, did you?" Leo, ever composed, looked at the stunned woman and offered a polite, serious nod. "Hello, Auntie. My name is Leo." Lily Shire peeked out from behind Kaylee's leg. "Hi, Auntie," she said in a small, sweet voice. "I'm Lily." Jessie's eyes darted between the twins and Kaylee, her expression a comical blend of shock and disbelief. She looked from one to the other, then back again, as if trying to solve a complex math problem. Finally, she grabbed Kaylee's arm and pulled her a few feet away from the car, lowering her voice to a frantic, stage whisper. "You didn't go to California for a master's program, did you? You went to a buy-one-get-one-free sale on children." Kaylee couldn't help it. She burst out laughing, though her eyes were suspiciously bright. "It's a long story. Let's just get in the car." Jessie, still sputtering, helped wrangle the mountain of luggage and the two children into her tiny CAR-IT was a tight squeeze. She watched, dumbfounded, as Leo climbed into his booster seat and expertly buckled himself in before turning to help his sister with her straps. "Is he even real?" Jessie muttered under her breath. As they merged onto the Van Wyck Expressway, Jessie kept glancing in the rearview mirror, her eyes fixed on the two small passengers. She noticed the way Leo's brow furrowed in concentration as he watched the traffic, the serious set of his jaw. There was something about his profile, a flicker of familiarity she couldn't quite place. Lily chattered away to Kaylee in the back seat, her soft, melodic voice a stark contrast to the blaring horns of the city traffic. "So," Jessie said, her voice carefully casual, "how old are they? And where's their dad?" Kaylee's faint smile vanished. She looked out the window at the passing blur of buildings. "They're almost 6, she said quietly. "As for their father, he doesn't know they exist." Jessie sucked in a sharp breath. The playful mood in the car evaporated instantly. She understood. This was serious. She pressed her foot on the accelerator, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, and said no more. They pulled up in front of a modest, pre-war brick apartment building in Brooklyn. Jessie's apartment was small, but it was immaculate and filled with a quirky, welcoming warmth. In the spare room, a bed was made up with brand-new cartoon-themed sheets. 2 stuffed animals, a fluffy bear and a sparkly unicorn, sat propped against the pillows. Kaylee's throat tightened. She looked at the thoughtful preparations, at the home her friend had made for her and her children without a moment's hesitation. Words failed her. She simply turned and hugged Jessie again, burying her face in her friend's shoulder. "You idiot," Jessie said, her voice thick as she patted Kaylee's back. "We're best friends. This is what we do." Later that night, after the twins were tucked into their new bed, exhausted from the long journey, the two women finally sat down on the living room sofa. The only light came from a small lamp, casting long shadows on the walls. Jessie handed Kaylee a cold bottle of beer and poured a generous amount of whiskey into a glass for herself. She took a sip, her expression serious. "Okay," she said, setting the glass down with a soft thud. "Now you can tell me, what the hell happened these last 6 years?" Kaylee stared at the condensation beading on her beer bottle. The glass felt frigid against her skin. She was silent for a long time, the weight of the past pressing down on her. She finally lifted her head, her gaze meeting her best friend's. She was ready to unburden herself, to share the secret she had carried alone for so long. The secret of a dark room, a terrible mistake, and the 2 beautiful children sleeping in the next room.